Talk about that. Welcome to another episode of the Conflict Zone, hosted by ISUPK Jamaica, where we look on the conflicts, at setbacks, and hold down our people. All right, this week now we're looking at a thing I call jettison. Right? The real reason for jettison during the slave trade. All right, it's not somebody's name that. Oh, welcome to our viewers on our various social media: TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Threads, Instagram, X, you name it. We're there. All right. So we say now this week, jettison. We're talking about jettison, and it's not someone's name. Now, during the slave trade, you had ships that carried the slaves from the west coast of Africa to the west. You had the triangle slave trade and so on. Now, all those ships was insured. So the cargo on the ship was insured. The slaves were also insured as cargo. Now, because of that, the rule in the insurance is is for claim on ship losing its cargo is if the cargo had to be jettisoned. So tell you what, I'm going to give you the meaning of jettison. And I'm going to post it. So jettison, according to Google, is to throw or drop something from an aircraft or ship. So in other words, when the cargo is have to be thrown overboard, that's called jettison. Now, that was a, you ever hear them say how many um, blacks lost their life during the Atlantic slave trade that was thrown overboard at sea? Yeah, that is called jettison. Now, on the ship log, they weren't thrown overboard as humans, you know. It was thrown overboard as cargo. So by being thrown overboard as cargo, they can claim insurance. Yeah. So because of that now, these ships, their captains and so on, they know the game. So they engage in some real hostile maneuvers with the slaves out there at sea. There was one slave ship which threw off about some hundred and odd. There was one which it crashed, it have a bad time at sea, the weather and so on and so forth, and then the ship run aground, meaning it went into water that was too shallow. So the bow and the base, the hull, I think, would have burst, and there were slaves on board. over 500 slaves, over 500 souls as cargo, listed as cargo, was on board. And they let them drown so that they could claim insurance for loss of cargo. In other words, they don't want to let you, they would let them go. Maybe they could swim, because if the ship run aground, then it means shallow water is nearby, so land is nearby. Maybe they could swim and survive, but they wouldn't be getting any money. So you know what they did? They killed the slaves. Yeah, loss of cargo. We had some real cool people dealing with who was over us during slavery. Man, they were cool. All right, we're going to some records of on Jettison. There are some videos on YouTube, and we check the history as to what the insurance says or said. All right, so this one now first. First video.
1781, over 130 Africans were thrown into the sea.
Right, this is the video. In 1731, over 131 Africans. Well, now we know it was Africans that they were enslaving, but they were enslaving Israelites.
So the ship's owners could claim insurance. Number 4, buck breaking. Enslavers used sexual violence against African men to strip them of dignity, traumatize families, and spread fear across plantations. Number 3, slave breeding. Enslaved women were forced to have children, treated as property to produce.
So these are some of the things that, you know, everything that we look on as slavery, except for the punishments. These punishments were some of these enslavers enact on the slaves, you know, defecating in slave mouth and them little nasty thing there. But outside of all that, it was everything else was really for profit. The growing of the crops, the breeding, everything. They did all that for profit. In other words, for the money. Slavery made the West so rich that riches is still circulating in their economy until today. Even now. Which is why you have the big rich America. Slavery. It was slavery that made them so rich. And it's slavery that is making them so rich too. Because it's not over. Right, so we can restart this video.
The transatlantic slave trade was one of history's darkest chapters. Here are 5 events that reveal its true horror. Number 5, the Zong Massacre. In 1781, over 130 Africans were thrown into the sea, so the ship's owners could claim insurance.
Right, that is the one that is telling about 5 things. The one that we're focusing on is this one, the insurance. There was some, even you even had slave life insurance. Can you imagine? You have today these white people that you have around being able to insure your black life? Can you imagine what it would be like? I mean, just see how we are treated in the empire. So, what would you expect? This somebody here want to try and see this somebody want to join as a guest or something like that. TikTok. You don't fully understand the TikTok. The TikTok need special attention. Right. So then call that the Zong massacre. Right. So can you imagine they have such leverage on you today in today's society? Going into some other thing. 10 facts about slavery. Something serious. Probably I should start reading them. Insurance practices during slavery. Don't think of this one. All right, insurance practices during slavery. Right? Yes, the loose then slave ship likely had its losses, including. All right, there was one that was called the one that is Zonk. They have one that was called the loose then. Right, let me touch that first. If I can find it. The loose then. A loose then called. I don't know where that one is. I wonder if it could be on Louis then. Slave, slave. You say YouTube available. Okay. This is the one that run on ground. Yes, and they have. Hmm. So we can find a sharp one. This is by the Associated Press. I'm not sure it is. So there's not Louis. This one is Costless Ships. You don't want to open the Louis then. The one that ran aground. So I'm going to the shop on this one. Right.
1738, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the prisoners were on deck to eat, the first mate sounded the depth of the ship and found that the water depth was over 5.7 meters. Immediately afterwards, the rudder hit the ground. The prisoners were ordered to return to the slave room immediately. 16 prisoners were allowed to remain on the upper deck. Among them were the 2 boys who had been given by de Boords for his brother in Amsterdam. It is not known why these 16 prisoners did not have to go into the slave room. The intention was to weigh anchor in seawards and thus enter more open water. The wind was now coming from the north. When weighing anchor, the ship ran aground 2 or 3 times. After the sails were hoisted, the wind died down and the ship got stuck on a bank at low tide. Shortly afterwards, the rudder was knocked away from the stern and drifted away. Water began to flow into the ship. The cabin and the constable's room began to fill up. They tried to close the hole with sail because the ship hit the ground a few more times and started to leak. It was not possible to pump the water out, and slowly the ship began to sink. Because of the ship hitting the ground and because of the large amount of water that had flowed in, the ship began to list. And to prevent the Lusden from capsizing completely, it was decided to cut the masts. The ship did not sink any further, and the crew was given the opportunity to save themselves by the heavy waves. Next morning, January 2nd, 1738, the 3rd mate turned. Because of the heavy surf, it was not possible to directly to the ship. In the meantime, the crew had put out the sloop. They had already suffocated in the sloop. Only the 16 who had been allowed to remain on deck during the disaster were still alive. In total, 73 crew members, Florentinus Camper, 16 prisoners, and the 2 were on the deck of the Lusden on January 2nd. About the dead in the slave hole, where they arrived at 4 o'clock in the morning on January 4th, 1738. Report by the captain and crew about the events that led to the sinking of the Lusden also mentions the way in which the African prisoners were driven to their deaths. Written in such a way that the client, the quick, grieved. Many questions remain unanswered as a result. What interests us most is the question why no other means were sought to save the lives of the prisoners, or at least given the chance to try to do so themselves. The prisoners were on the upper deck at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on December 31st. That was the time they were given food. It seems as if the prisoners immediately returned to the slave room after the order to go down. They would.
Alright, so what he's saying is in this document, so this is the ship, they dig up the ship and, well, raise it, found it, and now this is the story that they are getting. So he's asking the question, why are people asking the question, why weren't they were up there, why weren't they allowed to stay up there rather than to allow them to die? Well, I will read the answer. Remember the name of this ship, Lusden, Luesben. All right. So, yes, the Lusden slave ship likely had its losses, including the lives of its enslaved passengers, compensated for through insurance policies that treated the enslaved as cargo. So, this is the thing about the oppression. Your life don't matter. What matter to him is money. Just remember, slavery was done all for profit. And they are trying to do it again. Which is why you realize they are moving against our people to deal without a heart. And it seems as if some in the West here want to follow suit, right? As if some of the governments here in the Caribbean want to follow the suit, as if they don't know what's coming. But what they need to remember is that they have children and grandchildren who are black too. So when these, and they believe, a lot of them will say, oh, these things can happen. I mean, look what is happening in America. But no one tell you that no slavery can happen again. America have 700 military bases. Where have them to do? Same deploy, they call them National Guard and the blacks in Chicago. I mean, they run out the immigrants. They even take them off their jobs. Who you think is going to fill these spaces? They have prisoners, you know. That it's just a matter of time. As you have a shutdown now, just a matter of time before you start hear that the prisoner for hire program, you know, speed up or something. Who knows what exactly they are planning? We don't know. All we know is that they're planning to put you back in slavery. So I should say us, because it's not over, right? So if you notice, there's a lot of things in big coming up now on the internet about slavery. All the things now, one way or another, people research and put them out there, and it is showing you what they are like. So this one that I'm reading about was 17 something, 18th century slave ship, you said. 500 odd slaves on board. And the nail shut the door of the cargo hold where the slaves were. And guess what? Evidence shows that the 18th century slave trade involved insurance with practices such as slave life insurance, existing where the lives of enslaved people were insured as property, allowing enslavers to claim a financial loss if they were jettisoned, thrown overboard. Right? So once there is loss of life on that slave ship would then sail out and leave the ship there, that is recorded as loss of cargo. So you have 500 slaves to be sold. You have to jettison them, you throw them overboard, or they lost at sea through death. Guess what? The 500 slaves are sold through insurance. And the insurance have to pay back for them. So it was a practice, which is why you hear they talk about how many lost, they call it the middle passage, how many lives were lost through the middle passage. It was all because of insurance. Many of those lives could have been saved. When it comes, just remember this, when it comes to the oppressor, follow the money and you will know what you're up to. You can always follow the dollar and you know what he's up to. He's up to no good. Hey, Shalom. Shalom, Jan, Arjun, Araya. Shalom to you too. Alright, and touch our scripture before we move on further. Deuteronomy 28, 45 to 48. Touch that scripture. Deuteronomy 28 and 45. 48. All right, Deuteronomy 29. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed. So all the things that the Most High, hey, when you go and you read books or whatever, oh, you can succeed and blah, blah, blah. Listen, the thing that is happening with we Israelites, not Israelis, Israelites, is that we are being pursued by the Most High. Pursue us with his destruction and so on and so forth. All these curses shall come upon thee and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he command thee. Verse 46. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. So, which is why we as a black people have struggled so much. To get over this, we have to learn to obey the Most High. How do we obey? Do what the Bible says. Follow his holy days. Stop following the holidays of the heathens. Right? Stop keeping those holy days that they have, like the Christmas and the Thanksgiving, and this one coming up here now is in America. What do they call it again? Halloween. Should not keep those. And then Thanksgiving. Those should not be kept. If you follow God, follow what God says. 47. Because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, and for the abundance of all things. This is how you know that when they're telling about, oh, God loves everybody. Well, that's rubbish, right? And Christianity teach you as if, you know, just pay your tithes and sing 2 songs and get baptized, and that's it. That's rubbish. The blacks in the church suffer more than the whites and the other races, because this ain't following them. 48. Let's scroll it up a little more. And verse 48 says, Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee in hunger, in thirst, in nakedness, and in want of all things. You look at the Chinese. You think they're going through these things? They're not going through these things. The whites not going through these things. The man can't tell about no all man are equal. Never say. The Most High choose one set of people who are the children of Jacob, right, to serve him and to be over this earth. And the covenant we have with God says, as long as we serve God, we will have dominion over the earth. We're not serving him. We're not doing what he says. By the way, you serve God by doing what he says. That's how you serve God. For all the Christians who didn't know. All right, back to 48. Want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. I remember during slavery we did have yoke, that iron thing upon our neck, which is not needed now on any worker. Why? Because he's already destroyed. That's why the scripture said that will come up when you are destroyed. So when they say, all right, give the slaves freedom, but then talk about emancipation and liberty and so on. Hey, we done destroyed and then we're coming with that. All right, real quick, let's go back to um, read some more on the, where is it, where is it, where is it? That's one that I pull out. So, insurance practices during the slave trade. Let's take a quick look at this one. Well, it's the same thing that we're reading about jettison. Insurance practices during the slave trade. So the purpose of the jettison really is for insurance, for claim insurance. So a lot of the time they would have purposefully, they would have taken on more slaves than what they have the ration for, or in other words, food. So they had more souls on board than food available to feed them. This was known before they set sail. When they reach in the middle of the Atlantic, they would drop anchor and throw over some slaves because they are considered sold, because insurance is going to pay them back for them. And they are not going to just get back the money that they spend, right? Most likely you get monies like you would have sold, like the for the cost you would have sold it. All right. So the insurance market treated enslaved people as property of cargo, not as individuals and inherent rights, with inherent rights. Slave life insurance. This was a form of non-life insurance that covered the financial value of the enslaved individuals. All right. General average claim. Scroll up some more. General average claims. Owners could present claims for general average if enslaved people were thrown overboard during heavy weather to lighten the ship, as the cost of the lost cargo was considered a shared loss among all interested parties. So it looked like they catch up with them at some point. Later prohibition, by the late 18th to early 19th centuries, laws were passed to prohibit such insurance practices, making it illegal to claim compensation for the mortality or loss of enslaved people. And that most likely was after they realized the insurance fraud that they were committing by purposefully jettisoning enslaved person so as to claim insurance. That's one certain way to get your slave sold, right? The ones that throw them overboard, they are considered sold. So if you have 500 slaves and you throw 100 overboard, 100 sell already and you don't even reach the shore. This is all heartless and cruel the oppressor is. Which is what we're wondering, what is it that they have up their hands to do? We know that They want to bring people underground with them when the nuclear war start and they're going underground. You know that they want to bring people underground with them as slaves, you know. And the scriptures tell you that. All right. Topic for another class. You know that they want to do that. And they don't necessarily want slaves down there. I mean, prisoners down there. They want persons who are able bodied, can think and so. Because I remember, you know, the West here was grown based on our inventions and things as black people. We here in Jamaica, there's some slaves in Jamaica, slaves and free men invented the co-op method of mass producing wrought iron, which brought about the industrial age. No compensation for them, the inventions as blacks. The whites got it. In America, they invent so many things. Who get them the inventions? Them, the white, the oppressor. Right? The white team man get all those inventions. Alright, let me go on to this one. Okay, one fact. The thing is, you know, whenever there is whenever there is a Facebook, whenever there is a Facebook video, you have no control over where it starts. This one I was talking about this song. I think I'm talking about this one earlier. So the thing is this. All right, so come on, man, this one. 10 facts about sleeping in America. Okay. One. Get me this one. Come on. All right. So should I this instead onto stage and then play.
Let's get one thing straight. Slavery in America was not just about picking cotton. It was a systematic machine of cruelty, profit, and control. Here are 10 facts they left out of your history books.
Right, and at the center of slavery was that word they used, profit.
1.
But guess what? We shall look at them the same way.
Slavery in the U.S. began in 1619, when 20 enslaved Africans were brought to Virginia. That marks over 240 years of legalized human trafficking before the Civil War. 2. The U.S. was one of the last in the West to abolish slavery. The land of the free, only after they wrung every drop of labor from stolen black bodies. 3. Enslaved people built America. They weren't just laborers, they were architects, blacksmiths, seamstresses, inventors. The wealth of Wall Street and the Ivy Leagues built on their backs. 4. Enslaved women were forced into breeding farms. Their pregnancies weren't sacred, they were property expansion. 5. Children were sold like livestock. Babies were taken from their mothers and auctioned off before they could speak. 6.
This one is a BBC, like a documentary. Let's play like the first couple minutes. Then we'll jump into some scriptures and we can jump out after that. Look, we now know that they are coming again. How are we going to stop them? Not by might. Can't fight them by might. Let me play this.
One of the most tragic chapters in human history is the transatlantic slave trade, when at least 12 million enslaved Africans were violently and cruelly uprooted from their homes and sent across the Atlantic Ocean to strange lands. It's thought that as many as 2 million died before they even got there.
You hear that? As many as 2 million sold. Yeah, I didn't get paid for them. They were lost cargo at sea, jettison, or if it's not jettison, is like in the case where the ship crashed, lost cargo. So the cargo can be lost. If the ship go down, you lose the cargo. If you throw them overboard, you lose the cargo. Yeah. So as many, it is believed, and that is BBC saying that, you know, which means the figure probably higher than that. Because BBC go and try to tell you now about it, like that they will be speaking for their person, British Broadcasting Corporation.
In this episode, we look at how, where, and why this slave trade began, and the devastation it wreaked on Africans and their continent.
There was not a single spot of a continent that was out of reach of enslavers. It is more than the physical destruction of people. There was no hope for anyone for centuries.
So the consequences is the development of Africa, just because they chose as the youngest and the strongest.
The transatlantic slave trade that existed between the 16th and 19th centuries was as catastrophic as it was extensive. This is Ghana's Atlantic coast, and I've come here to give you a sense of just how many European nations were involved in the slave trade. There are more than 30 old slave trading forts along a 250-kilometer stretch of beach today, built by various European powers. Cape Coast Castle was built by the Swedes in 1653, but it changed hands 5 times over the...
I want to pay attention to this one. This castle. It was call it a slave fortress. Cannon, guns, and all that.
Next 11 years, ending with the British. Now, when the castle was originally built, it wasn't done very well. The roofs would leak, the ceilings were pretty dodgy, and the walls were quite insecure that they could even collapse. And so the whole castle was rebuilt in the mid-1770s. I want to point out something to you. Where those boys are going in is one of the male slave dungeons, and above it is what was a church. Today it's a library. So I just want you to reflect.
That's the part I want to reflect. I want to think about. The slave dungeon, the male slave dungeon, was right underground there. On top of that was the church. So I tell you, we went into slavery under the church. And in this case, literally under the church.
On that, many meters below, a male slave dungeon.
And this is from the BBC. This is a BBC documentary.
And above ground, a church which the European slave traders would worship at. Much has been written about the experience of enslaved Africans in Europe and the Americas, but less about what slavery meant for Africa. First, it's important to understand that the Europeans were not the first to trade in enslaved Africans. The Arabs had engaged in this since early on a massive scale across the continent, the In and the Red Sea. Also, Africans themselves had long practiced a form of slavery, using captives from battle as unpaid laborers, soldiers, or domestic servants. Cameroonian academic Professor Augustin Hole is president of the Scientific Committee of UNESCO's General History of Africa, on which this series bases its facts.
Right, so the elephant backdrop there on the slavery and what they were really about. Let's jump back into some scripture. We just have a couple minutes remaining before it's time to go. So how do we get out of it this time? Because they're coming back. The West is in financial trouble. They're looking for your free labor to in some ways, they want the free labor to stop all to alleviate the pain. Right? I mean, the pointing at Judah, but I don't think it's just Judah. Maybe Judah first, and then they take time catch who they can catch. Judith 5:21. How do we get out of this? We have to know what we are in, understand what we are in, before we can talk about getting out. So this is a book in the Apocrypha named Judith. Judith 5, it tell a story where Ethan was reading our history unto his general, military general, right? And this is what, and he was telling basically was telling the general that, listen, them people are not coming to sin, and you can't defeat them. And right now, they have not sinned. So, which means These nations round about us was watching us. And every little avenue they get, they would entice us to sin. Right? I want to read this story, you can see that. Now, we're 20. All right, 19. But now they returned to their God and come up from the place where they were scattered and have possessed Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate. 20. Now therefore, my Lord and Governor, if there be any error against these people, and they sin against their God, let us consider that this shall be their ruin, and let us go up, and we shall overcome them. 21. But if there be no iniquity in their nation, let my Lord now pass by, lest their Lord defend them. Basically, he was telling them, if they don't sin, and you go and try and fight them to overthrow them, their God, their Lord shall defend them, their God shall defend them, and their God is going to be for them, and their God be for them, and we became a reproach before all the world. So Akia was giving the general Holy Furnace, something like that, our history, and tells a leave it right. It was all furnace. And he didn't listen, so he lost his head to Judith, because God stood up for us. So how are we going to fight them this time? We have to get God to stand for us. Or do we get God to stand for us? As blacks, Hispanics, and Native, He is our God. We are the only ones He has ever fought for. Let's go to Zechariah 4 and 6. In the book of Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6, the Most High spoke to Zechariah and tell him how it is done. He answered and spoke unto me, saying, this is the word of the Lord unto Zerubbabel, saying, not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. So we have to really get the Most High's spirit in us as blacks, Hispanics, and Native, so that He can fight for us. Not a physical fight. In other words, the enemy get. All right. In the time, the story that I just read, Judith just read from, the book I just read from. Judith didn't, it was that army that defeated all of us. One woman, the general in, and everybody else scattered. Right? That's the Spirit of God. That wasn't by might or by power. So the same thing today, not by might or by power. And for you Christians who think that who believe that the Israelis are the ones to follow. The Israelis are using might and power. I mean, but he's telling us it's not by might or by power, it's by the Spirit of God that we shall be free. Right? Not by might, not by power, only by the Spirit of the Most High God. Now, what's the next thing? Right, so they're coming back to you for financial gain. What you're gonna do this time? So this is what we're gonna do. Get the spirit of the Most High God in us. Increase our integrity. That's what we have to do. Right? Let the Most High look at you and say, you know, yeah, these people are worth fighting for now. Let me come down and fight for them. In the spirit of the Most High God, you will see them just like how you say. You notice in that war with Russia and Ukraine, realize everything that NATO should assist Ukraine with just don't help. Every move they make is like it's the wrong move they make. Well, it's the same way the Most High is going to fight for us. Finish. It's the same way the Most High is going to fight for us. Yeah. And they start making them wrong moves. In the meantime, what do? Work on the spirit of the Most High in you. In all you do. You go out each day, you're going to work, you're going to sleep, you're going to this. Throw away the unclean thing. Every man who doing unclean thing, know that they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. But throw them away. Alright? To get the spirit of the Most High God in us. Alright, so that's all we have time for this evening. So conflict zone. And thanks to our listeners, our watchers. And we're still inviting participants. Still inviting person to they can call. We have the phone number there. So until then, I'm going to say shalom.